Hi guys, today is, I think, the 5th of January. Let me check. Nope. Today is the 6th of January 2018 in New Zealand. And today I'm going to debunk the myth about sacral pressure for back labor. I finally learned and remembered to do descriptions before I did this live Facebook broadcast. So the description talks a little bit about it, but for those who want to listen rather than read, I became involved in birth in the early 1970s, and then nobody talked about back labor. It's not that it didn't exist. Posterior babies have always existed, as have breech babies or transverse, the ones lying sideways. But what they did know was very, 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 very few babies delivered sunny side up with their face to the pubic bone, which meant that babies that were being felt, because you can feel their little limbs at the front of the belly and not their broad back, had turned either before labor or inside the pelvis during labor or inside the birth canal after full dilation and when the baby came into the birth canal. So the vast majority of babies delivered with the back of their head to the pubic bone. So they didn't deliver posterior, even though they sat inside the woman's belly in a posterior position. But it was in the late 1970s, the early 1980s, because America was quite unique. We have 50 states, and midwives had been outlawed by 1957. So those people who were doing home births were lay midwives. There were Vietnam paramedics that had come back who were doing a lot of births. There were some obstetricians, some general practice, some obstetrical nurses doing home births. So the scuttlebutt in the home birth movement was how exhausting long labors were for midwives. And that's true, because they don't go on shift. They offer what's called continuity of care. And if a woman doesn't give birth in 8 to 10 or 12 hours, then it becomes exhausting. You can understand that. And that's why continuity of care also has some issues, but we're not talking about that today. And then the other thing that was being said was back labor is exhausting for women because the contractions don't go away between the contraction as they do when you have uterine labor. And that's true. It is exhausting for women. And so people weren't certain what to do about it. So two things sort of sprung up, not quite simultaneously. The first one actually was apply pressure to the sacrum, which is what we're going to talk about. And the second one was optimal fetal positioning, and then eventually, very much more recently, spinning babies. And somewhere in between there was the use of the rebozo to get the baby into a good position, which also has some issues to it. So prior to all of this, throughout time, at least as far as we know in research, people have always tried to turn babies. In fact, there was a Dutch midwife, I think in 18-something, that considered it to be sort of ethically and morally wrong that babies delivered into the world head down because we walk with our feet. So she went inside a woman's uterus when she was fully dilated and turned every baby into a footling breech and then delivered the baby. Go figure, okay? So, but let's talk about pressure on the sacrum. We have a pelvis, and you want to go get a pelvis, okay? So the pelvis doesn't sit like this. It actually sits like this. This is the pubic bone. This is one bone, and this is another bone, and the leg bones are here, and each pubic bone becomes the hip bone, and in the back are the bumps that you feel back there. And in between those bumps is your sacrum, which is at the end of your spine. That sacrum has a shape. It's unique to you. They're all triangular. Some of them are very broad. Some are quite narrow. Some are very long. Some are very short. Some are very flat. Some are very curved. Find out what yours is, okay? But whatever shape your sacrum is, that is the bone that your baby, the solid object, can move out most easily. And because the nerves come down the spine through the sacrum, when there is pressure on the sacrum, we feel back labor. When there isn't pressure on the sacrum, we tend to feel uterine labor. Although, as some women will tell you, they can get labor in their butt or they can get labor down their legs. Nobody gets labor in their shoulders or in their fingertips. So it's all located in this area. And what's it doing in this area? That's the thing that you have to understand, is you have this big object coming through this area. And this big object has to pass the biggest part of itself, and that's dependent on the shape of your baby's head, through the narrowest part of your pelvis. And that's determined by being able to do what we call the internal work and being able to feel inside the pelvis. If you go to an obstetrician, some do pelvimetry x-rays to determine the shape of your pelvis. And there are lots of things on Google that show you lines that talk about proper dimensions. Honestly, it is the relationship of the inside of your pelvis to the size of your baby that is a determinant factor. So, for instance, we can have women who are very small in stature, very skinny women, who go, I'm tiny and I'm afraid of giving birth. And then they easily, in a 4-8 hour birth a 10.5-pound baby. This is not magic. This is the map of her pelvis, which is what Birthing Better families started to do. We needed to know what our own shape was. We needed to know whether our pubic bone had a broad arch or a narrow arch. Because it had narrow arch, it would require the baby to move backward in our pelvis. If that was combined with a flat, broad sacrum, we were more likely to have back labor if that was combined with a baby that was a fairly large fit for us. And how do we know these things? Because we fiddled. We fiddled, not because of anatomy and physiology. If you can feel on a woman's belly towards the end of pregnancy, and you can't find the head above the pubic bone, or if you put your fingers inside and you can feel this much of the head, then you know where the baby is. Birth is mysterious. It doesn't have to be a mystery. It's mechanical. It's an object coming through a container. And you can feel where your baby is, but nobody's told you you should feel where your baby is. And that's what we at Common Knowledge Trust are trying to do, is to share these Birthing Better skills. But I can be talking to a void right now. If you guys don't share these videos with people, then I have spent 45 years of my life talking in an empty room. So back labor is caused by a tight relative fit of your baby into your pelvis based on the shape of your sacrum and the mid part of your pelvis. You can't feel the inlet. That's inside there. You can only feel the mid part by putting your fingers in, and you can only feel the edges, but you can find the map out, external part, what is coming out of the arch of your pubic bone, the distance between your sit bones, the distance between your pubic arch and your tailbone, the size, shape, curve of your sacrum and tailbone. Don't forget that as well. And then the other thing, so the size of the baby relative to your space can be a determinant factor whether you have back labor. The other thing is how much tension do you have that hold these bones together. So we learned as Birthing Better families that we have 4 types of tension, which we will talk about at some point. But if you have a lot of tension and your sacrum can't move easily, and your hip blade and sit bone, if you lie down and you do a lift, doesn't move easily, then that tension internally in you is what your baby is trying to get out of its way. So you can understand why there can be pressure on your sacrum. whether your baby is posterior or not. The reason that people think it's more common in posterior babies is that a posterior baby that has its spine to your spine has a tendency to not to tuck over, curl over as much if its spine is to your belly, or actually to your one side or the other of your belly, because your babies don't come down straight down like this. They come down, when you look at a pelvis, the dimension is on the diagonal. So a baby's back tends to be either to your right side or to your left side. And if it's straight up and down, then you have to determine which way is your baby trying to tuck its head. Okay. So when a baby is more extended, it tends not to drop its chin to its chest, which is called flexion. And when the baby doesn't drop its chin to its chest, then a broader dimension of the baby's head is trying to come through your pelvis. Or if the baby puts its head to one side or the other, or turns it a little bit, then that's another broad dimension. And that medically, and I've never taken anatomy and physiology, so honestly, I just mimic comments. Now there's somebody who wants to have a comment, but I actually don't know how to do that while I'm talking live. So please leave the comment on the Facebook page and I will respond to you if you don't mind. I don't have 4 hands and I only have 2 eyes. So, where was I? Okay, so when a baby is coming through the pelvis, it is hard to determine whether the baby is coming through in a really best position or whether the head is slightly tilted one way or the other. When the baby is posterior and it deflexes and it has a broader part, and because its back is towards your back, so here's your back and your baby's back is here, that means the back of the baby's head is pressing up against the sacrum. And that's a harder object than if the face was pressing against the sacrum. So posterior babies do create back labor if they are a tight fit and based on the internal tension in your pelvis and based on the shape and size and tightness of your sacrum. So, and we have to know these things. And this isn't hard to know. So in labors in the late 70s, people started to try to find skills to help reduce the pain. There's nothing wrong with that. That's how we start evolving skills, is we do certain things and then we evaluate and see if they work. And obviously they work for enough people to get passed down as skills. But when they don't work for enough people, then we have to evaluate whether the process to get to that skill was really the process we needed to take. And since Birthing Better started in the early 70s, same time, we took, the families who developed Birthing Better, the hundreds of them, took a different approach. And that approach was to create space in the pelvis by mapping our pelvis, knowing the shape of our pelvis, knowing how to reduce internal tension, and learning skills that would open up our pelvis. And this is all in our online course. And I can't go over all of this all at once. And so we have skills like mapping your pelvis, understanding your sacral shape, your sit bone shape, being able to do a hip lift, which is not the same as pressing on the hips that you see in some videos. Being able to do Kate's cat, or the Sacral Manoeuvre, which actually articulates and moves the sacrum. All of this we do from 24 weeks of pregnancy onward, because we condition our bodies to create space to let our baby come down, engage, to put more of its head or butt through the mid part, the smallest part, its largest part through the smallest part, and be able to have a more effective ability to move down through and out our body. So when we have back labor, the first place that we feel pain in back labor tells us what part of our body the baby is stuck in. And as the baby, and if the baby can move down. That pain moves down because the tightest part of the inside of us is having to get the biggest part of the baby through it. So the sacrum moves up and down from the spine, and it moves this way and that way when you walk forward. So if you put your left leg forward, your sacrum does that a little bit. If you put your right foot forward, it does that a little bit. And it has the ability to articulate or move from those bumps that are part of this pelvic girdle. So when we move the sacrum, we can move the sacrum this way, and that creates space in the top to the middle part of the pelvis. Or we can move the sacrum a little bit this way, which creates space in the middle part and the bottom part of the pelvis heading towards the birth canal. And we can do this with your partner learning it, because all of the Birthing Better skills are designed for you to learn at home, not to hope you have a professional who learns these or knows about your body. They won't. They don't. So we took charge ourselves to do this ourselves. And then one woman said, I can't feel that when my husband is doing that. So she then stood up off the bed and started to play around with how she could create that articulation in herself. And that's the skill named after her, called Kate's cat. Now there's an exercise that has women on all fours, and it's a yoga pose to arch your back and then curve your back. But that's not the same thing. And it's important for you to eventually play around with the difference of articulating your sacrum standing up than it is on all fours. So when people applied pressure to the sacrum, they were pushing in to release the pain of the nerves, but it closed the space of the baby. And the reason that Birthing Better families started to say that isn't working was that didn't work. Fathers would press on the sacrum for hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours. It was exhausting. And the birth went on for hours and hours and hours and hours, because the space to the baby was being compressed, as well as relieving the discomfort for the woman. So instead, our approach at Birthing Better was to create space and to learn how to open our body, create mobility, create softness inside, to work with creating space in labor if we needed to, and to be able to really clearly say, this is where the baby is stuck. So how do I open that space? And we learned there were multiple ways. And if you've listened to any of these videos, one way was to just breathe in into your pelvis and expand out your sacrum. And then when you exhaled, to soften inside your sacrum. We aren't taught to do this. There's no shame, blame, guilt. It's just that childbirth skills are very, very, very new. They started really just before I gave birth in the 1970s. And Birthing Better is the evolution of those skills. It's not that those skills are wrong. It's that we needed to evolve them so that they worked more effectively for more people, and they worked because we first prepared our body so that these problems didn't occur. So if you have a posterior baby and you want to spend time trying to spin it, turn it, or whatever, that's fine, do it. But please spend a fraction of that time learning to create space in your body and to reduce your inner tension. And if you have back labor, begin to think through, where is my baby stuck? And how do I create space in that stuck part? So one more thing, which I'll go over at some other point. Put your thumb and index finger really tight together. You can't move that. How much space does a baby need? Most people say it needs about this much space. No, it doesn't. It needs you to just soften and allow this to slide. This is not hard. We just need to pass this on to one another, and we need to grow a skilled birthing population. So please share this video, and please purchase the Birthing Better resources. We have one specific for VBAC, We have broken up our big course into 3 skill set courses, and we know that they can change birth because they have for 45 years. So see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.